A man can survive a bullet, a war, and 100 kinds of pain. But betrayal, now, that cuts the deepest. My name's Nolan Young, 58 years old. I've been a Marine, a bodyguard, and a security consultant. Grew up on a ranch outside Fredericksburg, Texas, learning what hard work meant before I was old enough to shave. I spent years protecting people, reading threats before they surfaced. Yet, somehow, I missed the one under my own damn roof. The first time I noticed something off with Hannah, I chalked it up to stress. She always had that nervous energy, fast talker, quick with a laugh, always moving like she was late for something. But then she started laughing too much, dressing a little different, checking her phone with that fake, guilty little look she thought I wouldn't catch. "Everything good?" I asked one evening as she stirred a pot of something on the stove. She startled like I'd snuck up on her, then smiled too fast. "Of course. What?" I let the silence stretch, watching her. She turned back to the pot. That was the first red flag. The second came a week later. She had a wine night with the girls. I was supposed to be out of town, consulting for a logistics firm in Houston, but the job got delayed. Didn't tell her. Instead, I watched as she got ready, curling her hair, slipping into a dress that wasn't for sitting around drinking cheap rose with her friends. She was humming. Hannah didn't hum. "Which friend is hosting?" I asked. "Trish," she said too quick. I nodded. "Tell her I said hey." She grabbed her purse, kissed my cheek, and was gone before I could say another word. I poured myself a whiskey and waited. 10 minutes later, I pulled up her location. She wasn't at Trish's. She was at La Vigna, some high-dollar restaurant in downtown San Antonio. I'd taken her there before, anniversary dinner, 2 years back. She said it was too fancy, preferred our steak nights at home. So what changed? I didn't storm in, didn't cause a scene. That's what weak men do. I drove down, parked across the street, and watched from the truck. The restaurant had those wide front windows, lights warm and low inside. That's when I saw her, sitting across from him. I took in everything. The way she leaned in, how she laughed with her hand on his arm. Not forced, not polite, but easy, like this was the most natural thing in the world. The man was built, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, Seth Rojas. Chef's jacket hanging on his chair like he wanted people to know what he did for a living. He said something, and she tilted her head, smiling like she used to with me. My jaw tightened. I could feel the old instincts creeping in, the ones trained to spot threats, neutralize them before they became real problems. My hands flexed on the wheel, but I didn't move. A waiter stepped into view, setting down a glass of wine in front of Hannah. Tall guy, well-groomed, probably early 30s. He glanced up and met my eyes through the glass. Didn't look away, just nodded. That was all I needed. Someone else had noticed. I could have walked in right then. Could have sat down at their table, ordered a drink, and let the weight of my presence do the talking. But I was done acting on impulse. If I was going to handle this, I was going to do it right. I waited until they finished their meal. Seth stood first, tossing some cash onto the table like a man who didn't think twice about money. Hannah followed, brushing her fingers over his arm again. They walked out together, her arm linking through his. I let them go. When I got home, I pulled out my phone and made one call. Mason Taylor picked up on the second ring. "Nolan," he said. "Thought you were in Houston." "Change of plans," I said. "I need some intel." "Who's the target?" "Name's Seth Rojas. Chef. Works private gigs. Probably has a string of rich clients. Find out everything." Mason let out a low whistle. "Shit. He take your money or your woman?" I took a slow breath. "Just get me what I need." "Copy that," he said, and the line went dead. I set the phone down, staring at the dark kitchen. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I poured another drink and sat at the table, the wood worn smooth from years of use. My father built this house with his own hands. He raised me on hard truths. If a man can't trust his own, he has nothing. Hannah thought she could lie to me. Thought she could giggle her way out of it, like she always did. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Mason worked fast. By morning, I had a file on Seth Rojas sitting in my inbox. I didn't check it right away. Instead, I made coffee, black and hot, the way it should be, and took it out to the porch. The sun was just coming up over the hills, casting long shadows across the pasture. I'd built this place for peace. Now it felt like the walls were closing in. I finally opened the file. The first few pages were routine, background, employment history, where he went to school. Culinary Institute in New York, worked in some high-end restaurants before shifting to private clients. That's where it got interesting. He had a pattern. Rich women. Older, usually married. Got close, got in, then moved on to the next one. No criminal record, but Mason had flagged a few lawsuits. Breach of contract, undisclosed NDAs, a couple of threatened restraining orders that never went through. Women didn't want the embarrassment of airing their dirty laundry. I closed the file. I didn't care about his past. I cared about now. About Hannah. About how she thought she could sneak around right under my nose and get away with it. I needed to test her. See just how deep this went. That evening, I found her in the kitchen, humming again, some pop song off the radio. She had a glass of wine in her hand, barefoot, hair pulled up like she was comfortable. Like she had nothing on her conscience. Thinking about having a family dinner, I said, leaning against the counter. Luke's been busy, figured we could have him out this weekend. She hesitated, just for a second. Then the smile came. Oh, that sounds nice. But this weekend might be tough. I already made plans with the girls. Which girls? She blinked, too quick. Trish. You know, the usual crew. I nodded like I believed her. Maybe we can reschedule, then. Yeah, she said, turning back to the stove. We'll figure something out. She was lying again. And she thought I was too dumb to notice. I called Luke that night. He picked up on the third ring. Hey, Dad. What's up? Thinking about doing a family dinner this weekend. You free? Yeah, should be. Mom cooking. Something like that, I said. He laughed. All right, just let me know the time. It was set. Now I just needed to see what she would do. Friday night, Hannah came home late. She smelled like expensive perfume, the kind that lingered in the air long after she passed. She dropped her purse on the table, kicked off her heels, and stretched like she was exhausted from a hard day. How was girls' night? I asked, keeping my eyes on the TV. Good, she said, moving into the kitchen. We just had some wine, caught up. You know how it is. I didn't answer. Just let the silence settle between us. She didn't ask me how my day was. Didn't sit down next to me like she used to. Just poured herself another glass of wine and disappeared upstairs. I turned off the TV and picked up my phone. Mason had sent another update. More photos, this time of Hannah and Seth outside a hotel downtown. Not some roadside dive, but a boutique place. The kind meant for secrecy. She was leaning into him, hands on his chest. He kissed her forehead before they walked inside. I set the phone down, jaw tight. I'd seen enough. The next morning, I made a call. Caleb Briggs answered on the first ring. Nolan, he said, his voice as steady as ever. What's the job? Need some work done on the house, I said. What kind? Rebuilding. There was a pause. Then, I'll be there in an hour. Caleb had been through his own mess, divorced, lost half of everything, built it all back up with his own hands. He didn't waste words, didn't ask questions that didn't need asking. When he showed up, he had his toolbox and a six-pack. We sat on the porch, drinking the first one in silence. Then he set his bottle down and said, "Tell me what's broke." I told him. He listened, nodding, taking it in like it was blueprints for a job. When I finished, he cracked open another beer and said, "You thinking quick fix or total demo?" Total demo, I said. He nodded. Smart man. I had the plan in place. Now I just needed the right moment to put it into motion. Caleb worked fast. By the next morning, he had measurements taken for repairs I didn't really need. New lumber stacked on the side of the house, a plan laid out. It gave us a reason to be busy, gave me an excuse to move in silence while I lined up the real work, the kind that had nothing to do with nails and screws. Hannah barely noticed. She was too wrapped up in whatever fantasy she thought she was living. She still played the part of the happy wife at home, still filled the house with her fast-talking chatter, but I saw it for what it was now. Filler. Distraction. I let her have it. Let her think I was the same man she'd been fooling. By midweek, I was ready to set the hook. You ever heard of Rojas? I asked Caleb over coffee on the porch. He grunted, taking a sip. Yeah, the chef. Does fancy private gigs. Overcharges for steak, from what I hear. Seems to be charging more than that. Caleb smirked, shaking his head. Tell me we're about to ruin his week. Better than that, I said. The next morning, I made a call. The La Vigna waiter, the one who'd caught my eye that night, was named Thomas Gates. He was sharp, professional, and like most men in his line of work, knew when to keep his mouth shut and when to open it. You remember me? I asked when he picked up. A pause. Yes, sir. I remember. You want to make some extra money? Another pause. Then, I'm listening. I laid it out plain. Told him I needed information, casual and off the record. Who Rojas worked for, how often he brought women in, whether the restaurant had any quiet agreements about discretion. Thomas didn't hesitate. Give me a day. By that evening, he had everything I needed. Rojas had a routine. He liked control, liked to be the one who set the scene. He handled private catering for a select clientele, mostly upscale women looking for something more than a meal. His reputation was quiet, protected by money, but Thomas had seen enough to know the truth. He picks them carefully, Thomas said. Wives of executives, older women with influence, but not the kind who will go to the press. You're not the first husband. Good, I said. That means I won't be the last. The next step was simple. I needed to bring him into my setting, a place where he had no control. Friday morning, I set the bait. I called Hannah while she was out. Thinking about having a get-together this weekend, I said. Nothing big, just friends, maybe some clients. Figured we'd hire a chef, do it right. She hesitated, but only for a second. That sounds nice, she said, voice light, a little too quick. I could help set up? I got it covered, I said. I already booked someone. She didn't ask who. That told me everything I needed to know. By the time Saturday rolled around, the house was set. The backyard was strung with lights, the long wooden table set for a meal that was never going to happen. Friends were arriving, old Marine buddies, neighbors, a few of Hannah's coworkers. And then there was Isabella. She showed up just as the sun started setting, stepping out of her car like she owned the ground she walked on. She was sharp, polished, a woman who had once believed in Rojas and paid the price. Now, she was here to collect. She didn't say much when she saw me, just extended a hand. Nice place, she said. Thanks, I said. Hope you enjoy the show. Hannah was inside, flitting around the kitchen, nerves stretched thin. She still didn't know. Not until Seth Rojas walked through the back gate, sleeves rolled up, apron tucked at his hip, ready to cook for the man he'd been sleeping around on. The moment she saw him, her face went white. Rojas hesitated, just for a second. Then he did what men like him always do, smiled, played it off, acted like nothing was wrong. Nolan, he said, offering a hand. Thanks for having me. I took it. Firm grip. Didn't let go right away. Looking forward to it, I said. His confidence flickered. Just for a second. Then Hannah's hand landed on his arm, a silent message. Play along. Too late for that. The trap was already closing. Rojas pulled his hand back first. He recovered quick, nodding like this was just another high-end gig, but I caught the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked toward Hannah for half a second too long. He knew something was off. Good. Hannah tried to mask the panic with a forced smile, moving toward the drinks table like she had something important to do. She didn't. She was just running, buying time, trying to think her way out of a situation she couldn't control. I let her. Rojas went to work, setting up in the outdoor kitchen like nothing was wrong. He moved with confidence, easy, practiced motions, grabbing a cutting board, checking the grill, laying out fresh herbs. He had the kind of presence that made weak people trust him. Women like Hannah, looking for something they couldn't name, saw that charm and mistook it for something real. I watched him for a while, giving him rope. Let him play chef. Let him think maybe, just maybe, this was all some strange coincidence. Then I made my way over, grabbed a beer from the cooler, and leaned against the counter. Smells good, I said. He glanced up, smiling just a little too wide. Gotta say, Nolan, you've got good taste in food. This kind of setup, he gestured to the spread, this is the right way to eat. I took a slow sip, nodding. Yeah? You cook for a lot of married women, or just mine? His hand froze over the cutting board, just for a fraction of a second. Then the mask came back on, but his voice had lost a little of that polished smoothness. Not sure what you mean. I smiled, slow and steady, then nodded toward the table where Isabella was sitting, sipping a glass of wine, watching like a hawk. You remember her? He followed my gaze, and his whole body tensed. Isabella gave him a small, amused wave. Rojas exhaled through his nose, setting the knife down with a little too much care. He turned back to me, dropping the act. All right, he muttered. You want to do this here? I stepped in a little closer, just enough to let him feel it. That's the thing, Danny. We already are. Around us, the gathering was still in full swing. Guests talking, laughing, catching up. Hannah was standing stiff near the back door, pretending to be part of a conversation but not listening to a damn word. She kept glancing toward us, nerves shot. I turned back to Rojas. Here's how this is gonna go. You finish cooking. You smile. You play the role like a good boy. And when this night ends, you disappear. No calls, no texts, no cute little midnight visits. You're done. His mouth tightened. And if I don't? I set my beer down slow, then leaned in. You might have fooled Hannah. Hell, you might have fooled a dozen women before her. But you don't fool me. I know men like you. I know how you operate. And I know exactly how to ruin you in ways you haven't even considered yet. Rojas swallowed hard. He wasn't stupid. He knew he was trapped. I clapped him on the shoulder, all friendly-like, and stepped back. Now get back to work. People are hungry. He did. Because he had no choice. Hannah didn't speak to me the rest of the night. She knew. She knew I'd let it play out, let her hang herself with her own rope. But she also knew this wasn't over. Not yet. When the last guest had left and the house was quiet, she stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She didn't look at me when she spoke. How long have you known? I walked past her, opened the fridge, pulled out a water bottle. Took my time. Then I leaned against the counter across from her, met her eyes. Long enough. She let out a breath, one hand running through her hair. Nolan, No, I cut in. You don't get to explain. You don't get to justify. You made your choices. Now you live with them. Her throat worked like she wanted to argue, but she knew better. She nodded once, sharp, lips pressed together. So what now? I finished my water, tossed the bottle in the trash. Now? You wait. For what? She asked, voice quiet. I smiled, slow and cold. For what comes next? Then I walked away. Hannah barely slept that night. I could hear her shifting in bed, turning over, sighing. The weight of it was finally sinking in. The next morning, she was up before me, pacing the kitchen, phone in her hand, staring at the screen like it might give her an answer. Probably waiting for Rojas to call. He wouldn't. Not after last night. I poured my coffee, sat down at the table, and watched her. She flinched when she noticed, setting the phone down like she hadn't been gripping it tight. You need something? I asked, taking a slow sip. She shook her head. I think we should talk. I nodded, waiting. She hesitated, glancing at the window like she was weighing whether to bolt. Then she squared her shoulders, like she was about to make some grand confession. I never meant for it to happen, Nolan. It just... Don't, I said, voice even. Her mouth opened, then shut. You don't get to stand here and insult me with that. Nothing just happens. You made a choice. Over and over again. Her jaw tightened, something defensive flickering in her eyes. You act like I did this in a vacuum. Like you had nothing to do with it. I let out a short breath, shaking my head. That's where you're wrong. I had everything to do with it. I trusted you. I built this life for us. And you took a match to it. She looked down, fingers twisting together, searching for something to say that wouldn't make it worse. Nothing came. I pushed my chair back and stood. Here's how this is gonna work. I'm filing. You're gonna sign. And you're not gonna try to take one damn thing that isn't yours. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. Nolan. You think I don't have it covered? I cut in. You think I didn't lock things down before I even set that table last night? You get a lawyer, you'll find out real quick. There's nothing left to fight for. You walked away from this marriage the second you walked into that hotel. She paled. You can't just... I already did, I said. She gripped the edge of the counter, breathing fast. What about the house? I shrugged. It's not yours. Her face twisted, like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to scream. But I sighed, the moment she realized she'd lost. Not just me. Not just the life we had. Everything. She sank into a chair, staring at nothing. I don't know where to go. Not my problem, I said, grabbing my keys off the counter. I didn't wait for a response. Walked out, let the door shut behind me, and drove into town. Caleb was already at the house when I got there, tossing lumber onto the ground, rolling his shoulders like a man ready to work. He nodded when he saw me, eyes sharp. How'd it go? She's still standing. For now. He snorted. Could have told you that. People like her, they don't break all at once. They crack a little at a time. Then one day, they look around and realize they got nothing left. I leaned against my truck, crossed my arms. She'll try something. He nodded. Of course she will. But you're 3 steps ahead, right? I didn't answer. Didn't have to. Caleb grabbed a crowbar, turning back to the porch. All right, let's get to work. Nothing like tearing something down to clear the mind. I took the second crowbar from the pile, rolling my shoulders. Let's start with the rot. Always the best place to begin, he said, grinning. We got to work. By the time I got back home, Hannah was gone. The house was quiet, stripped of her usual background noise, the humming, the hurried footsteps, the phone calls she thought I didn't notice. Her purse was gone from the counter. The coat she always grabbed was missing from the hook. She left in a rush. Good. I took my time fixing a late lunch, steak and eggs, simple. Sat at the table, let the silence settle. It felt different now. Cleaner. The divorce papers were already drawn up, airtight. I wasn't going to waste months fighting over things that were mine to begin with. Hannah might try. She might throw one last desperate punch, thinking she could salvage something. But there wasn't anything left for her here. Halfway through my meal, my phone buzzed. Luke. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. Son. Hey, Dad. You got a minute? I set my fork down, leaned back in the chair. Yeah. He exhaled, long and slow. Mom called me. Figured she would. That's so. She was crying. Said you're kicking her out, taking everything. I let a pause stretch long enough to hear the irritation creeping into his voice. And what do you think? I think she's lying through her teeth, he said flatly. But I want to hear it from you. I rubbed a hand over my jaw, nodding even though he couldn't see me. She made her bed. I'm just making sure she lies in it. Luke was quiet for a beat. How bad was it? Bad enough. He let out another breath, something hard settling into his tone. Yeah, I figured. He took after me in ways Hannah never understood. He wasn't the type to get emotional over things that didn't deserve it. He saw the world in clear lines, right, wrong, consequence. It's why he was a good lawyer. You need anything? He asked. No. Got it handled. All right. Just let me know if that changes. We hung up without another word. That night, I sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, watching the wind move through the trees. Caleb's words stuck in my head. People like Hannah don't break all at once. They crack, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. She'd crack soon enough. It was just a matter of time. I was halfway through my drink when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. I debated ignoring it, then picked up. Young, I said. A pause. Then a voice I hadn't expected. Detective Harris. Evening, Nolan. I didn't respond. Just waited. You might want to hear this, he said. It's about Rojas. I stayed quiet, waiting for him to get to the point. He's in trouble, Harris continued. Big trouble. Fraud, money laundering, bad business deals. Turns out your little chef has been under surveillance for a while now. I swirled the whiskey in my glass. That's so? Yeah. And given your recent history with him, I figured I'd give you a heads up. He's trying to shift blame, drag other people into it. You might want to be careful who you've been seen with. I let out a slow breath. Appreciate the call. One more thing, Harris added. Your wife's name came up. I stilled. Come again. She was seen with him, Nolan. More than once. If I were you, I'd make damn sure she's not sitting on anything that could drag you down with him. I didn't answer right away. The whiskey suddenly tasted stale. Understood, I said, then hung up. I stared out at the dark horizon, jaw tightening. I had handled the affair. Handled Hannah. Handled Rojas. But this was unfinished business. And I didn't leave loose ends. 3 days later, Hannah came crawling back. She showed up in the middle of the afternoon, knocking like she still had a right to be there. I let her stand on the porch for a minute before opening the door. She looked like hell, hair a mess, eyes red like she'd been crying, but there was still something calculating in her expression. Nolan, can we talk? I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. About what? She glanced past me, like maybe she thought I'd let her inside. I didn't move. She swallowed, shifting her weight. I don't know what to do. I let that sit for a second. Not my problem. Her jaw clenched. You really don't care, do you? I looked at her, long and hard. No. She exhaled, shaking her head, then she changed tactics. Rojas is in trouble. Serious trouble. I got a call from some detective asking about him, asking if I knew anything. I already knew where this was going. I waited. I didn't say anything, she continued. But Nolan, if they think I had something to do with. You did. She snapped her mouth shut, stunned. You knew who he was, I said, voice even. Maybe not the details, but you knew the type of man he was. And you got in bed with him anyway. Her hands clenched into fists. I didn't break the law. No, I said. But you broke everything else. Her lip trembled, but I wasn't falling for it. I'd seen enough. I pushed off the doorframe, stepping closer until she had to tilt her head to look at me. Listen to me, and listen good, I said. You don't call me. You don't show up here again. If they come asking, you handle it yourself. Because if you think for a second you can drag me into your mess, you're dead wrong. She blinked rapidly, breathing uneven. She knew there was no angle left to play, no string to pull. I stepped back, hand on the door. Good luck, Hannah. Then I shut it in her face. The next morning, I got another call from Luke. She called me again, he said, voice tight. I already knew what was coming. What did she want? Money. Said she's in trouble. I waited. I told her no, he said. Pride swelled in my chest, but I kept my voice level. Good. She sounded desperate, he admitted. She is, I said. Doesn't mean she's your problem. Silence stretched for a beat. Then he sighed. Guess she's gotta learn. She does. We didn't say anything after that. Didn't need to. A week later, the news broke. Rojas was arrested, some high-profile sting operation. Money laundering, tax fraud, wire fraud, you name it. His list of high-class clients started scrambling, pretending they never knew him. And Hannah? She disappeared. I heard through the grapevine that she left town, went to stay with some old college friend. Didn't matter. She wasn't my concern anymore. I had work to do. Caleb and I finished rebuilding the back deck. Isabella checked in once, just to make sure the job was done. I could tell she wanted to ask if I'd come out for a drink, maybe see where things went. I didn't. I wasn't looking for company. One night, I sat at my desk, wrote a letter to Luke. Not a long one, just a few lines. Son, life doesn't hand out second chances. When people show you who they are, believe them. And when they betray you, don't waste time asking why. Just cut them loose and move forward. That's how men survive. Proud of you, Dad. I folded it, sealed it, left it on the table for the next time he came by. Then I poured a drink, sat out on the porch, and watched the sun set over my land. The air was crisp, the wind steady. The past was finished, and I was still standing.